Hospital Porter's pride and dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV. Welcome to this. Another reply video to Stefan Molyneux, Mr. Molyneux himself. Yeah, how many reply videos have I done to Stefan Molyneux now? I've honestly lost track of them. I really have literally lost track of them. So many. Anyway, hope everyone's doing all right. Before we begin, I've got a little interlude for you. Sweeps Fox has sent me another little animation. I'm just going to show it to you now, just to get you in the mood, warm you up, you people. And it's really, really cool, actually. Where was it? Yeah, here it is. This is going to make you laugh. It's actually it's silent. There's no audio. There's no soundtrack on it. But it's like, if you watch my last video, the live stream I did about a paper mask, the Theo's live stream, you'll get it. You'll get it completely. So here we go. I'll just show it to you now. Let's just stop it so we get it to the beginning, and I'll just put it on like large screen. There we go. Okay, guys. So I'll just share screen. There we go. This is going to be funny. Thank you very much to Sweeps. I'll put it on that actually. Thank you very much to Sweeps for doing this. It's great. It really, really is. Here we go. Just having fun. Yeah, that's what we were doing. It's a party. Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much, Sweeps, for that. That's great, mate. That's great. Yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, we got another reply to comments video from Stefan Molyneux. How about that? Yes, I've done so many I've lost count, but I haven't done a reply video to Stefan since last September. That was one about bullies. And this is different. This is a third reply to him. This is a third reply on the subject of mysticism. Now, I don't think have I done any other third reply videos to Stefan Molyneux? I think maybe I did one about UFOs. I haven't looked it up. I've done so many videos I can't keep track of them. But you know, sometimes one reply is not enough, and I need to do more than one. And it depends what he talks about, is whether I come back and do second, third, etc. replies to him. I don't think I've done a fourth reply yet on any subject, but this does require. This is a subject I've obviously done. Mysticism is a subject I've done 2 previous reply videos to Stefan Molyneux on, and in this case, I'm doing a third reply on this subject. Yeah, funny enough, I haven't done a reply to Stefan since last September. Yet the second reply to Stefan Molyneux on mysticism was actually in 2023. It was actually in September 2023. So it's quite a while ago. So it's been a while since he's brought up the subject of mysticism. Funnily enough, believe it or not, I've got another reply video to Stefan Molyneux in pre-production right now. God, that sounds so pretentious, doesn't it? Pre-production. Who am I, Mel Gibson? I'm planning one, basically. I'm researching a second reply video to Stefan on another subject. It's actually dolphins, to give you a bit of a spoiler. I'm actually doing a second reply on the dolphins. I've got a first one on dolphins previously. Now, in the course of this video, I'm actually going to claim fair use on what I'm about to play. It is a segment of a Free Domain Radio podcast, which he actually posted a few days ago. And once again, I'm faced with this dilemma. This is a dilemma that's very common. I talked about it when I did my little reply to Skeptic of the North, my little review of his series. And I'm in this situation again. The dilemma is this. Do I play the entire audio that I want to play and therefore risk breaching fair use guidelines of copyright? Alternatively, I could play less of it and just stick to small segments of it, and then be accused. Like they're saying, well, why don't you're actually editing this playback to disadvantage the person you're disagreeing with? That's the dilemma. With Skeptic of the North, obviously, I chose the former, and later on he turned against me because of it. But Molly hasn't yet actually turned against me just yet. He doesn't seem to mind. He probably does know about my videos. In fact, he's even used a couple of catchphrases of mine in his own production. So I expect he does watch me. In which case, Stefan, thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe. Anyway, now some of you, I reckon some of you, I know at least a couple of you who watch me also watch Molly, and I've got a feeling that some of you are going to guess that I was going to make this video very soon. How do I know that? Okay. The reason is because I'll actually be discussing a little bit of one other video and then a lot of a second video. And the second video is the one which I think a lot of you are going to predict that I'd make a video about, and about this subject too. The video is called, it's FDR Program 6451. Goodness me, he's made more videos than me. 6451. And the title is called Do Not Fuck With Mysticism. X Twitter space. That's what it is. The moment I saw that title, long before I'd even heard the actual video, long before I'd heard the actual program, I thought, that title means I'm going to be making a video replying to him. I know it. Yes, I am. Yes, indeed, I am. So, yes, I am a bit predictable, aren't I? Anyway, but the other actual. First of all, before we get onto that one, 6451, we're going to deal with another one. A very brief clip from Free Domain Radio program 2735. This was quite an old one. I think it's back in 2015. This was actually broadcast. It's called Sex, Lies and Imaginary Friends. Great title, isn't it? Great title. Anyway, I'll play a little bit of that. Before we begin, yeah, I think I should say that a lot of the points I make, I think I've made before on the other two videos. Now, I haven't gone back and watched the other two videos, the other two reply to Molyneux Mysticism videos, but I've got a feeling I'm going to repeat some of the points I made in those videos. And if I do, well, sorry, but I'll try to keep this original as I can. All right. So I don't imagine any of you are going to mind. I don't imagine any of you are going to mind. I may repeat some of the points I made. Okay. Right. First of all, as you all know, ladies and gentlemen, when I do my Stefan Molyneux reply videos, indeed reply videos to a couple of people, I have a little bumper audio. Now, the bumper audio is a very, very short audio tag, which I play when it appears on the soundtrack of the video that I'm listening to, of the audio I'm listening to. And I have edited it slightly. I have edited it slightly for brevity, just to point out, because this is just when he goes completely off topic. You hear this bumper audio that reminds me to stop. I've got to actually interject some commentary at that point, and then I go to my notes and I made a list of all the different bumpers and the notes I'm going to make related to it, because I haven't watched this before. I've listened to well, it's not the entire show actually. It's only like the first segment of it. In fact, even if you look at it actually says there's like timestamps in the show notes to it, so you can find, if you want to listen to the original with Stefan, you can find out exactly where that is. So there's little bumpers every so often you'll hear. When you hear those bumpers, that means I go to my notes and I inject some commentary. I made some notes about what I want to say, and I try to make these bumpers original and interesting and funny. And in this case, because we begin with the subject of imaginary friends, I have chosen a very, very brief piece of audio from, I don't know if if is better. If the video if is the movie that appeared in the cinema a couple of years ago, and I did a full roving review of it. But either that one or the other film, Drop Dead Fred, is the best film ever made about imaginary friends, except possibly Harvey. That's an old one with James Stewart. That's very good as well. But definitely Drop Dead Fred is one of the best. It's certainly the most poignant. And I chose a little segment about in that. And if you've not seen Drop Dead Fred, it's a brilliant comedy film with Rick Mayall. And it's a comedy, but it's also extremely sad. And as I said, if I did a little review of it once, I explained it's probably the saddest film I've ever seen, as well as very funny. But it's only, I think it's more sad for me than for most people, because it's just particularly it tugs at my heartstrings in a way it probably wouldn't tug at other people's. I found it extremely sad. Extremely emotional, very, very, very poignant indeed. But anyway, let's just play the bumper for you. I'll play the bumper and then we'll begin. So here we go. Let me just find the actual file I'm after. This is always the longest part of the film, isn't it? Here we go. Molly audio. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Oops, no, I don't want to change the title. I want to play it.
Shit yourself.
That is Rick Mayall. Rick Mayall plays the imaginary friend. I think I made 2 videos about this, and Phoebe Cates is his it's this girl, when she's grown up, she starts encountering her old imaginary friend again. It's a bit like the film If, which is very, again, if you haven't seen the film If, please do go and watch it. So that's the bumper. Now, to give you a bit of background, there's when this caller calls in, Stefan almost actually kicks him because she says, "Oh, I recognize your voice. You're a troll." And eventually, this guy persuades him to stay. It persuades him to stay, and they have what I think is a very interesting conversation. In fact, Molly actually seems a bit nicer than he normally does in this, I must say. I think there's lots of other people who've called in and have said similar things to Molly, and Molly has been like as bitchy with them as usual, or even, like I said, I've made this complaint about him before. He goes on these long scathing rants about people because they make a spelling mistake in the locals chat or something like that. And he said something really horrible the other day. I can't remember the program. It was actually, I listened to it when I was on my way back from South Wales, when I went to the Lighthouse conference. This guy called in, and he just kept making these habit phrases, saying, "Oh, to be honest," he started every single thing he said with the words "to be honest." And Stefan said, "Could you please not do that? That's really annoying." And the guy said, "I'm sorry, I'm autistic." And he said, "I don't care." I said, "Please don't make excuses. It's not polite," and things like this. And I thought, he's not making excuses. He's doing an explanation. Stefan has these habit phrases too. We all do, don't we? We all have little habit phrases that we little words or little little phrases, little words, little series of words and little sentences we say over and over again. All right, and they characterize us. And Stefan sometimes does these things, and they annoy me. I get annoyed when he keeps saying kibble. He says the word kibble sometimes in a very, very bad context. And that annoys me. So am I going to say, Stefan, stop using that word kibble because it's an excuse and you're being impolite? No, of course not. So shut up, Stefan. Anyway, but like I said, in this particular video, he's a lot better. He comes across as much more pleasant in this video. But first of all, before we begin, I just got a very, very brief segment I want to play, which is relevant to this. It's relevant to what he says now. This is from program... This is a very, very brief segment, which I have edited slightly from program 2735. First broadcast, I think, sometime in the 20-teens. I think it was 2014 or 2015. And the reason I bring this up, because it is relevant to this more recent one, the one he broadcast just a couple of days ago. So we shall begin.
Let's see. Does Izzy... sorry for that, but she seems to be the...
Izzy is Stefan's daughter.
...only healthy child in the world I've ever heard of. Have had imaginary friends. For me, when I think about my childhood, it was always sort of natural. Reply to imaginary stories, and my caregivers, they tell me some funny stories. So do I. Again, sorry for some of this word salad. No, Isabella has never had imaginary friends because she has real human contact. So we certainly role play, right? We role play stories and all that. But she's never had imaginary friends. I believe that imaginary friends, they come out of isolation and loneliness. So she's not experienced that. So why would she have that?
Shit yourself.
Okay, so that is Stefan Molyneux then referring to his own daughter, Isabella, who I think she just turned 18, actually. So she would have been she'd have been like a preteen when this broadcast came out. Isabella doesn't have imaginary friends, and Stefan says, well, as you just heard, it's because she has real people to talk to, she doesn't need them. And that children who do have imaginary friends are essentially lonely. Now, there may be some truth in that. There may be some truth in this. So I'm just going to get something up which I didn't get up earlier on the browser because it's directly relevant. Oh well, Mike Hallowell. Okay, right. There may be some truth to that. It could be that children who are lonely or isolated, they are more likely to be seen playing with imaginary friends. I suppose the question would be is, in that case, are the imaginary friends really imaginary? And this is something I bring up in my review of Drop Dead Fred and the film Harvey. I did a written review of the film Harvey. Again, if you've not seen that, it's very, very good. It's an old film from 1950, but it's really, really good. It's excellent. But I did a review of both those films, and I asked that question, well, are these imaginary friends really imaginary? and I can't do better than recommend this book. In fact, I discussed this book in my review of the film If. Invisikids by Mike Hallowell. It's a second edition that's just been released by 14 Words. 14 Worlds. Sorry, 14 Worlds. 14 Words is a podcast. Invisikids. I've got a copy of this book. The original, this is the original that came out. I think he self-published it, which is actually not. Oops, sorry. This original is no longer in print, but it's, like I said, it's just been re-released in a new segment. Michael J. Hallowell. Michael J. Hallowell. I'm also very grateful to Mike personally, because Mike actually contacted me. I haven't spoken to Mike very much, but he contacted me many years ago when I was in the process of being dismissed from the hospital portering service, and offered me a lot of advice and a lot of support. So thank you very much to that, Mike. That's a story I've never really told before. So what I'm saying is that Stefan may be right up to a point about children, it being essentially a symptom of loneliness. But the question then goes, well, is that psychological factor, does it have any bearing on whether the phenomenon itself is objective or just subjective? Is it literally imaginary? Or are the children actually perceiving something that is out there and real? That's the question. And Mike brings that question up in the book. It's a short book. You can read it in, in a few hours. But it's packed with information. It really, really is. And now we come on to the second. That's all I wanted to play. Just wanted to play that tiny little segment of 2735. Now we come on to FDR 6451, the more recent one that was broadcast just a couple of days ago.
I mean, walking away from home doesn't put you in a psych ward. Lots of people do that every day.
Yeah, by the way, this guy has admitted he has mental problems and things like that. He did go into a bit of his background. He seems to be quite a troubled young chap, 20-something. And as you're about to hear, he does have some problems.
Hey.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. It's like my family, they're pretty toxic. So it's like if I try to run away from home, my mom might literally put magic spells on me to bring me back. So
your mom might put.
Yes.
So do you believe that those magic spells are real?
Some might be quite a bit more effective than others. It's kind of interesting. I have seen a ghost when I was 6, and yes, my 2 older siblings also saw this ghost. And they ran faster than me that one time. So, I know there are certain supernatural phenomena that's real.
No, there aren't.
They are.
No, they're not. No,
Yeah,
you gotta not mess with mysticism, man. It will break your brain.
Right. So Stefan discovers that this young man has beliefs. He has beliefs in paranormal phenomena, ghosts. He said he saw ghosts. He saw these ghosts, and he says he was not the only one who saw them. One of his brothers or sisters saw them too. And so it's not, he's not the only witness. So this is a witness testimony backed up by independent witnesses. Okay. And if he'd seen it on his own, let's face it, the skeptics would be raising the bar and they would be saying, yes, but why were there not independent witnesses, right? But Stefan, it just says, no, they're not. No, they're not. He just goes, no, they're not. I just hate it when people do that. And he completely ignores this caller's attempt to be rational. The caller made a rational case. And Stefan ignored it. And now he does, to be fair, he does come onto it, but he starts by being completely irrational and dismissive. It's important to recognize that problem that Stefan has there.
Dude, I understand being there's a difference between being skeptical and being a critical thinker. Because it's anyone could just be in denial about whatever, even if there is evidence. But there is.
Are you saying that consciousness exists in a ghost-like non-material form?
Okay, so now we have Stefan. He's not addressing the point the caller's just made. This caller actually, I mean, when he first joins at the beginning of the show, I got the feeling this guy's a bit dippy. He's a bit. Stefan accuses him of being a troll, and to be honest, his original he does get off on the wrong foot with Stefan in this particular call. And I did think to myself, this guy may well be trolling. This guy does sound a little bit, not mentally not all there. But when he brings up the subject of ghosts and other issues, it's pretty clear he's actually very, very articulate, very knowledgeable, and indeed, he attempts to reach Stefan on a rational level that Stefan would understand. And what Stefan has done now, he's just you're saying there's material, you're saying there's like ghostly things without material. So Stefan has changed the subject essentially. He's moved the subject's focus onwards from where the caller clearly wants to stop it. He wants to stop it, and he wants to address a particular point as part of his argument. And Stefan ignores that and wants to just move the focus on. And I don't like that. I think that's bad practice on Stefan's part. But anyway, these things are kind of resolved later on in this conversation. But I think this is not a good start to this conversation. This is not a good start to what Stefan's talking about here.
Of course, yeah. Like I find that pretty obvious. Like people have out of body experiences. I've had one once.
And what was your out of body experience?
So I tried to force myself to get up when I felt very tired. I was crawling on the floor. I look into another room. I see my second oldest brother helping my mom on a computer. And I'm really tired. I fall asleep on the floor and I get up and it's like, wait. And I realized, wait, I didn't actually crawl off the floor. I was lying in bed the entire time, but I could physically see into like this other room, like what was going on.
Okay, so this is interesting actually, because this is the first time in this conversation that Stefan has actually shown some curiosity about what this caller has to say. This caller who's not named, we never find out what his name is. But I would say to this caller, when he says I used the Force, that's kind of like it's a pop reference because of course it refers to Star Wars and the Jedi Order and things like that, which is kind of what, for some people, this is their only experience of mysticism because of the mystical elements of that film. However, this caller is obviously different. He obviously knows a lot more. And when the thing is, if he says I used the Force, or I tried something with the Force, this invites the rebuttal, the ridiculing rebuttal. Oh, I see. I think you think you're a Jedi, do you? Oh, right. Have you got a lightsaber in there somewhere? That kind of thing. Now, Stefan, to his credit, Stefan doesn't actually take that bait, which I'm pleased. Now, what he's referring to is very interesting because it refers to the works of Robert Monroe. Now, in the title slide for this particular video, I include a book that I've actually read called Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. And it's worth actually, let's just see if I can find some images of it, because he wrote several books, actually, Monroe. Here we are. Robert Monroe. He died a while ago, but he wrote a series of books about out-of-body experiences, how he can actually induce them. He actually learned to induce out-of-body experiences. There's this Far Journeys, and there's another edition of Far Journeys. This is the one, Journeys Out of the Body. This is the one I read. You can see I've used a bit of the book cover as the title slide. So it's the only one of his I read, but I found it very interesting indeed. I even tried some of the methodology in the book, which I found very interesting. Yeah, and Monroe did like proper experiments and stuff like that, which I think may be what this caller is referring to. He tried, from what I gather, I think the caller's actually tried some of the experiments that Robert Monroe did, in which case, all credit to him. Well done. That's exactly what we want. This is the kind of scientific, methodology that you think Stefan will be very happy about. So let's just see how Stefan responds to that.
Well, you know that the human brain is immensely and intensely capable of creating its own stimuli, right? I mean, every night we have dreams. Every morning we have dreams.
It's like
okay,
hang
on. You gotta let me finish my thought, all right? So we have dreams every night, every morning, where we step into other universes, things that are incredibly vivid. We touch, taste. I've heard beautiful music. I wish I could remember it when I woke up. And so we have this immense capacity for self-stimulation. We also know that human beings do experience hallucinations and so on. So that's a possibility, right?
Right, yeah. Now, So I think that's response from Stefan. Again, I think it's kind of not really. It's almost like a non sequitur. He doesn't really address. Well, he kind of addresses what the caller said, but what he said was when the caller started talking about this out of body study thing that he did, and he tried some experiments, and indeed the other people have done many, many experiments. It's a very rich and deep and very complex issue, which Stefan has obviously not heard of. He falls back by responding to a very, very superficial argument the skeptics use, and he uses it well. He doesn't go into depth, and he probably doesn't know all the details. He may not have them to hand. But then he says, well, these are simply the case of the brain producing its own stimulus. Dreams and hallucinations, yes, we have amazing dreams. I had a very interesting dream, actually, and when I got home from work, I'd had a little nap and had a very interesting dream. I don't remember them as much as I'd like to. Hallucinations, again, hallucinations are common, and indeed there's all kinds of different causes for hallucinations, and these things though are not about the real world. Dreams are a distinct different world. I mean, this is why when skeptics try to talk about out-of-body experiences and other altered forms of consciousness, and indeed I'll be talking about, if I remember, I'll remember to read the article which is based on what Susan Blackmore talked about, and I've mentioned Susan Blackmore before in my replies to Stefan Molyneux. They are distinctly different in the sense that they are an imaginary world. They are imaginary, whereas we're talking about things that are unusual and unexplained perceptions about the real world. No, these are dreams are not verifiable. Hallucinations are not verifiable. Some of these things are verifiable. And what's more, they are lucid. They're highly lucid, whereas hallucinations and dreams tend to be very surreal, very confused. I'm sure you've had dreams before where you're suddenly, you may be walking down the street with one person and then they suddenly turn into another person. You may be in one place, you turn a corner and you find yourself in another place. This is what I mean by surreal. And I mean, a good comparison is sleep paralysis. Now, I suffer from sleep paralysis, as you know, I've spoken about many times. It's not badly, but I do get it every couple of weeks. And it doesn't bother me because I've had it my whole life. I can actually see my bedroom because I can open my eyes when I am still in a sleep paralysis state. It eventually wears off and I wake up properly and can move around normally. But I suppose the thing is, are you actually seeing your own room, or is it based on through your eyes? Are your eyes actually open, or is it just a memory? That's an important question. But then, of course, people who see entities in their sleep paralysis, these are verifiable because, as I've explained many times before, many different people see the same thing. And indeed, the caller actually brings this up earlier on when he talks about his ghost encounter. So if many people are seeing the same thing, it could be that every single human brain in the world is hardwired to produce certain images under certain states of consciousness, which that would take a fantastic explanation. You'd ask yourself, well, why? Or these people are actually perceiving something objective, and in something in the real world, something actually outside of themselves. So that's I think the point that Stefan really doesn't get into. And so let's let him carry on.
I would say not at all. Like, there is a difference between hallucinations and gnosis. So gnosis,
he's making the same point that I am basically here.
That's when you can tell that, all right, your six senses that they're real, they actually add up to something. So if I see someone in a vision before I meet them, that would count as gnosis. But let's suppose if it's just in my imagination, it doesn't add up to something real, then I mean that's just a daydream. But if you physically see something that's not there, then it's a hallucination. If, let's say, other people see it, like, what are the chances you actually have group hallucinations where you see the same thing?
Zero.
Exactly, but that stuff, like, you do have people that do see supernatural phenomena. That is a real
lie,
thing.
and I'm not talking about you. You know, people lie about this collective stuff all the time.
Just because it can happen doesn't mean it does.
Hang on. People lie about this kind of stuff. I'm not talking about you, because you're talking about other people. So little kids, if you say, "Oh, there's a ghost," right, and you run from the room, they'll say, "Oh my God, there's a ghost," and then they literally will remember there being a ghost. I mean, this stuff happens, and it's been tested. And it has been recorded. There are tons of studies on it.
She's a
Yes, there are studies done by Skeppers. I'm just waiting for him to mention Randy's prize. Now, spoiler alert: he doesn't actually mention Randy's prize. He did in the previous one, but yeah, there are studies done by people like Professor Chris French, for example, who's a Skepper, and many others who are Skeppers. And the thing about it is, Stefan starts off by kind of agreeing with the caller by saying, because caller says, "What are the chances of that?" We all saw the same thing. And what's the chances of us all making it up? He says 0. But then he says, well, people just lie. Children will sort of will just go along with it and things like this. And although that is true, there is such a thing as folie à deux, mass hysteria. These things do happen. There's studies been done on things like lynch mobs and things like that, and crowd studies of various kinds. We're talking about something different here. We're talking about calm, rational people who are not necessarily involved in some kind of mob behavior. And so this is why some of the scientists who disagree with the Skeppers actually say that. But I doubt if Molly even knows about this.
And I'm trying to rescue you from a subjective universe. Now, whether you'll take the rope that's coming down the well, because right now you're trapped in the belief that delusions are real, that ghosts are real, and all that kind of stuff. You're trapped in all of that.
Shit yourself.
I'm throwing you a rope down the well, man. I'm trying to help you out of this. I mean, it's very patronizing, actually. It's a very patronizing way he put that. I'm just throwing your rope down this well, man, because I'm out of the well, because I can see through this sort of thing. When he knows nothing. He obviously knows very little about it. And the subjective universe, I think, might be a catchphrase by Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand has been very influential on Stefan, although he obviously has his criticisms of her. Stefan's done some interesting videos, actually, called The Truth About Ayn Rand, where he goes into this. But I think he's obviously picked up some of her own kind of verbal expressions, and also, I think, possibly some of her worldviews and her attitudes. So that's how I feel. And I don't know that for certain, but that's the impression I get from listening to that little segment.
And no, because I've definitely had seen a ghost before when I was like 6 years old. And other people seen it as well, so.
Well, I just point at this because, he's not answering. Stefan's not actually answering his point, because then in that little brief segment there, the caller interjects and tries to address that, and Stefan says, "Hang on," as if he says, "I'm not finished talking." Now, maybe he hasn't finished talking, but I think Stefan gets irritated with people who interrupt him, and sometimes that irritation is justified, but not always. In this circumstance, I think that was an interjection that Stefan should have followed up with. And later on in the call, he does allow him more leniency and more liberty when it comes to interjections. So I don't know why he doesn't that time. Because, just answer his point, Stefan. Stefan is not answering his point. That's what annoys me about that bit.
Shit yourself.
So you want to believe these things are real, and you want to believe these things are true because it makes you...
It's not about wanting.
Okay, I need you to let me finish my thought. Can you do that? Just say yes or no.
I'm letting you finish it.
Okay. Because, look, it makes you feel special. It makes you feel like I saw a ghost and I'm part of this wild, crazy universe that most people don't get or don't understand.
Shit yourself.
But,
that's kind of a fair point, because, when you do have these experiences and you meet other people who do, you do inevitably form a kind of in-group. It's a community. I've talked about this many times, that there is essentially a society that's kind of separate, almost a breakaway civilization from mainstream normies. And again, just the fact we use the word normies is an indication of that. We have an actual word for people who are not part of this society. And it's a fair point to say that inevitably leads to... Stefan would use the word cultic behavior. I would never use that term, but it leads to, I think, an internal reinforcement of certain ideas, which inevitably happens in any kind of community, in any kind of in-group. This is supercharged by, I think, the sense of camaraderie and bonding that and friendship that I actually really enjoy. It's the most important part of my experience of being a woo-woo. And that's true. And Stefan's right to say that. But yeah, that in itself has no bearing at all on whether the phenomenon is real or not, unless the only time it would have a bearing on whether the phenomenon is real or not would be if that kind of behavior, that kind of society, in a sense, shuts itself off to all rationality. And what you find is it doesn't. It does the opposite. That community, that sense, that community. In fact, I might as well just tell you this now. I've just bought my ticket to go to the Society for Psychical Research conference. I've actually joined them. I'm a member, and I'm going to their conference in November. That has no bearing at all on whether the phenomenon is real or not, unless you throw away rationality. And what you'll find is when you get into these communities, you do the opposite. You become more curious, you become more interested, and in a sense, in a strange way, you become more rational because you start looking at things that the skeptics won't, or even the normies won't. That makes you more rational, not less. And he says, I started a bit earlier. He says, but
it hurts your brain. It hurts your sense of reality. It hurts your ability to objectively communicate with others. You don't know if you're in a matrix or not. You don't know if you're in a waking dream or not. It is very, very bad for your brain to believe in mysticism. It is wretched for your sense of reality, your trust in the evidence of the senses. It messes with your sense of ambition and achievement. You said you've got all these business ideas, but I assume none of them have actually manifested. You can daydream. You can think that you're achieving things when you're not. And you can look into self-contradictory abstractions as if they're real. And it's bad for your brain. So go ahead.
That's probably the most patronizing thing he actually says in this conversation. Again, he's essentially describing the same thing that I just did, except he does it from the opposite angle. And he says, well, certainly these psychological traits is bad for your brain, therefore that does have a bearing on whether these things are real or not. And the fact is they're not. He kind of reverses the point that I made, and he inverts the actual rational equation that I put before you. And he says, well, because these things are not real per se, that's my foundational position. If you take any interest in them and believe they are real, then it's bad for your brain, you're daydreaming, etc., etc. In the meantime, your life will go to waste. You won't have any ambition. You won't be able to start your businesses. Yeah. Like woo-woos don't have businesses. I'm joking. I've self-published 3 books. No, 5 books. Or, to be fair, 4 books while I was a woo-woo and 1 when I was kind of sort of like semi-woo-woo. But yeah, I mean, this is nuts. And it's stupid, it's patronizing. And again, Stefan is displaying his ignorance here very, very much indeed. And again, it's not dependent on the phenomenon being real or not. And Molly's never addressed this in this entire conversation. He has that assumption. He begins with that assumption, which is why I think he and this caller don't really communicate very well. They're kind of talking on cross purposes.
All right, this is one area where I do not agree with you in terms of ghosts. In fact, I would say the whole atheist afterlife, which is just nothing happens, like that sounds so much more peaceful than believing in religion. So.
Sorry, ghosts can exist independent of religion, can't they?
Yes, however, all right, I'm not saying, all right, I believe in ghosts because of this, or that. I'm saying, all right, this is what you literally see with your own eyes. All right, it's like you're telling me what I see with my own eyes is like just, I don't know, some sort of interesting narrative I put together. It's like, no, that's not how it is. And
yeah, now I could have made the point. I'll make it now. I could have made it earlier in the last segment. I could argue I could make the same argument for Stefan's beliefs as he makes for ours. I could make the argument that, it's bad for his brain to be stuck into this world of atheism and skepticism, which is strangely enough a kind of inverse parallel to our own. And skeptics don't understand this. I've talked about this in my skeptic talk, and I go into great detail, if you remember, when I went to the QED conference a couple of years ago. I went to a skeptic conference. I made a video reportage about it. How many of you remember that? So in a sense, what the caller begin now the caller kind of breaks down a little bit in this particular segment. He's not articulating himself as well as he did before, and he's not expressing his views as well as he did before. But he does make the point that, well, atheism, it's more peaceful to be an atheist. In a sense, there is a psychological urge that drives people towards atheomaterialism. It has its own form of wishful thinking, as I've said many times. Now, this is partly MBA, and I've talked before about how MBA is a major factor in many atheoskeptics. But there's other, I think, elements as well, and I don't quite understand all of them. But some people do find comfort in believing that atheoskeptico-materialism is the position, is the way the universe works. So this guy did the right thing by countering Molly's psychological point with one of his own psychological points. He's quite switched on, this bloke. But then he kind of like doesn't really express himself very well for the rest of the narrative. But this will continue.
You know that memories are not real, right? You know that we invent a lot of things. We invent a lot of things in our minds, and stuff that seems very real. If we look back, it wasn't real. I don't know if you've ever gone back to places where you were as a child, but if you go back to places where you were as a child, your memories are not correct. Things are different sizes, they're different areas, they're different lengths. I've absolutely sworn that there was a line in a movie that I've thought about for years, and then I rewatched the movie for some reason, and the line doesn't show up. So I mean, it's not like everything in our memory is completely false, but memory is as much recreation as it is real.
Luke, I am your father. He never says that. Darth Vader never says that. Yeah, this is kind of what we have now is kind of a classic Mandela effect. Now, I'm not going to go into that right now. Well, what Stefan just described there, the line in the movie, is essentially a Mandela effect, which, of course, if I start talking about that, that'll take half an hour. So I'll leave that aside. But Stefan makes a correct point. That is that memories, especially memories of the distant past, are inaccurate. That's true. But then I think he says this as an attempt to explain away what the caller described. That is the encounter with the ghosts. And it doesn't. I mean, that alone cannot explain not just what this caller has experienced, but what many, many people, millions of people have experienced. And I'm not talking about the Mandela effect now. I'm talking about supernatural phenomena of all kinds. Just saying, well, you misremembered it is not an explanation. It's one that skeptics come back to again and again and again. And I'm not surprised Molly's brought this up, because Molly, again, he has a very superficial knowledge and understanding of this issue, in my view.
And here's the other thing, and this I get a little impatient about, because in the 1970s, when I was growing up, there were all of these beliefs in ghosts and UFOs and astral travel and out-of-body, blah, 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 blah. And ghosts would have to impinge themselves on the eyes, right? They don't just show up in the mind. So ghosts would have some tangible, real impact on the eyes. And now every single person, well, almost every single person has a 1080p or 4K 60 frame a second camera on them at all times that they can whip up and film. And science have tried, the dead outnumber the living 30 to 1. Science has tried to find anything to do with ghosts.
Yeah. Oh, well, Stefan gets annoyed about this. When Stefan starts getting annoyed, you're in trouble. I find that annoying. I find that annoying. Yes. And ghosts would have to impinge. Well, ghosts do impinge on the eyes. Ghosts, strangely enough, it's almost like some of the times they almost act like they're aliens. They seem to have some kind of physical presence. They'll leave footprints. There's things like ports. It's a complicated stuff. I mean, there's more than one form of ghosts. In fact, the word ghost, I think, may be a generic category that we've used to describe more than one phenomenon, certainly. But I mean, actually, he says that science has disproved this. Well, science, whatever that might be, trust science, man, whatever that is not. Science has not disproved this. Certain people who are scientifically qualified and describe themselves as scientists and do scientific experiments claim that these things have never been shown to operate. They've never been shown to be real. But the problem is that most scientists don't even try. They don't take this seriously at all. There are some noble exceptions, which I've talked about many times. Rupert Sheldrake, lots of other people. I'd like to think of some more examples, but there are real. Oh yeah, Gary Schwartz. There's loads of people, real people, who do look into this and come up with different conclusions. And the reason why most scientists don't look at them, I think I've talked about this many times. I won't go into details again, but there's a massive cultural and group psychological urge or drive in the scientific world to take the position that most scientists do. That is the majority will not. So if you put it on a pie graph, to quote Skeptic of the North, it looks like friggin' Pac-Man. And it's not because of what's real or not. It's because of what most people think or not, based not just on what they discover rationally, but how they're influenced by their position within their own society, within their own in-group. So again, I don't think Stefan really has grasped this issue properly.
Do you know that there's consciousness without matter is like saying there's gravity without matter, and everyone has got the exact equipment they would need to detect and show ghosts, and they have never been reproduced. It is a fantasy, and it's a dangerous fantasy. Look, I obviously can't convince you of that if that's what you want to believe, but I'm telling you, it is a very dangerous fantasy. It will leech your life away to believe in the unreal, and you should try and find a way to feel special in this life without having gone through some made-up mystical experiences. There's amazing stuff out here in the world to do. And the other thing, too, is that you can't get any rational women if you believe in this supernatural stuff. You can't, they won't have anything to do with you. And thus you're left with the crazies. And if you want to spend your life around the crazies, that's not a good plan, in my humble opinion, and you should try to avoid it as much as humanly possible.
Shit yourself.
So skeptic women won't want to date me. I can live with that. Not that skeptic women are all very unattractive, but I think that they would. Most of them I know. I don't think they'd be able to tolerate me, and I wouldn't be able to tolerate them. Now, what Stefan says with that thing about women is simply well, that's kind of just normal. That's kind of what happens when people are whether people are compatible or not. That's all that means. That's all he's talking about here. Now, what he also mentions is he brings up the consciousness, right? He talks about consciousness and how, well, you saying there's an element of consciousness that is not part of matter. Now, this is the dualist argument. I doubt if Stefan even understands that term, but I never heard that term. But this is what he talks about. He says dualism says essentially there's something outside there's something outside the universe that is invisible that actually animates the physical in terms of a body and a brain. This is like Descartes, the pineal gland, and how the soul comes in through the pineal gland. Descartes was wrong there, but I mean, he did live a long time ago before we understood neurology. But you see, the thing about this, he says, well, what about gravity? That's like saying there's gravity without matter. Okay, that's a good example, because, okay, well, what powers gravity? Where's the fuel for gravity? Why is it we get supernovas of stars? Why do stars become supernovas? It's because the fusion fuel within them runs out, and the gravity that pulls the matter within a star doesn't. And so they collapse on themselves. Well, how come the gravity fuel doesn't run out then? Where's the fuel coming from? See, that's a kind of an analogy. So Stefan has actually brought up a good analogy without really knowing it. But then we come on to like what's again Stefan I don't think perhaps understands. Or he certainly doesn't display any knowledge of it in this conversation. The hard problem of consciousness, which Anthony Peake has discussed in great detail. So have others, David Chalmers, who Peake has often referred to and often cited. But even like skeptics like Sam Harris and have actually brought this up. Sam Harris is a skeptic materialist, although he seems to be wavering a little bit. But even he has accepted that the hard problem of consciousness is real. He disagrees with Daniel Dennett, and Dennett is a skeptic who said, well, the hard problem of consciousness is not actually a problem because it's a non-issue, because what it describes essentially doesn't exist. Susan Blackmore takes this position as well. Yet Sam Harris says, as an atheist skeptical materialist, has said, no, there has to be something more going on. Even Michael Sherman mentioned this when he was on the, he did his debate with Jesse Michaels the other day. And of course, Dr. David Deutsch, who studies artificial intelligence, what's interesting is his work on artificial intelligence has actually led him to kind of accept that there's more to consciousness than in the material. And indeed, Sam Harris, and he had a very, very interesting discussion on this. On the subject of photographs, okay, photographs have been, he says, well, no one's ever produced a photograph of anything valid. We all have like cameras everywhere, you know, on our phones and stuff like that. Why has no one produced any evidence? Well, there's two problems with that. Firstly, when people produce evidence, and have done, when long before there were mobile phones, when cameras were like big boxy things like that, which you had to look down on, and they only took black and white shots, all right? Photos of paranormal phenomena date back right through the history of photography. But when they've been presented to the scientific community, they've been ignored for the reasons I've already explained. The second problem is that these days, this hasn't always existed through the history of photography. It's only been a problem for the last decade or two. But these days, it's just too easy to fake stuff. And there are so many fakes, so much so that, you know, even if you present something that's real, who's going to believe it? If it looks weird and it's real, they'll say, well, you just faked it. And this day, unfortunately, in this day and age, they might be right. So, in a sense, this is another burden on all paranormal phenomena, not just ghosts, but UFOs, Nessie, Bigfoot, stuff like that. There's a massive signal to noise ratio because there's so many videos and photos out there of all kinds of weird things, and you know that 99% of them are fake. You don't know which percent, you don't necessarily know which ones necessarily are the fakes, but you do know that a vast majority are fake. And this causes you maybe to be skeptical about all of them. That's the problem. Now, as far as crazy women, you know, he then says, he then accuses him of making stuff up. I don't know what he says. Do I have to listen to that bit all over again? I'll go back and listen to this again. Hang on, here we go.
All right.
Made up mystical
There we are.
experiences.
Okay, here we go.
Try and find a way to feel special in this life without having gone through some made up mystical.
Yeah, he says you need to find a way. You want to feel special in this life. There's ways of doing it without this made up mystical thing.
Experiences. That's amazing stuff out here in the world to do. And the other thing too is that you can't get any.
He's making an assumption about what this is motivating this young man in his life. What if this guy's not just making, accusing him made up? It's not made up. Or maybe Stefan just thinks, well, you're not making this stuff up, but you're believing stuff that other people have made up.
Rational women, if you believe in this supernatural stuff, you can't, they won't have anything to do with you. And thus you're left with the crazies. And if you want to spend your life around the crazies, that's not a good plan, in my humble opinion. And you should try to avoid it as much as humanly possible.
Okay, so that brings us back to the women again. Now, I'm glad I went through this little bit again, actually, because what this man did, he reported a real experience. In the sense that it fulfills the criteria of what most people will consider when they see something that is actually objectively real. That is, if you're walking down the street and a bus drives past and you point at it and say, isn't that the number 11 that's the number 11, isn't it, to Garsington? And someone says, I can't see any bus there. You must be hallucinating. Even though you've hallucinated something very normal, you're still hallucinating. Yet if you say, someone says, yeah, that's the bus, that's the one you want to get. Again, that's veridical. That is, most people would use that as a standard of reality. The problem is when you come up, this guy saw something different. He didn't just see something normal and mundane like a bus. He saw something specifically supernatural. Yet it fulfilled the same evidential criteria, and Stefan said he basically is dismissing it. Not because the evidence is different, but because the nature of the phenomenon is different. And as for rational women, some of the most rational women and men I've ever known are in the woo-woo world. And let's face it, I wouldn't. The last relationship I had, which was a long time ago, it was about 10 years ago, was with a fellow woo-woo. And let's face it, who else would put up with me? Who else could I put up with? If I find myself another girlfriend, and I hope I do, she's going to be one of us. Let's face it. I know that for a fact. She's going to be a believer in all kinds of things that I believe in. Otherwise, we just drive each other crazy. So let's carry on.
All right, now you're just gaslighting.
Well, you're just making up words there. It's not actually an argument.
I mean, to say that you're just gaslighting, I mean, that's not an argument.
No, gaslighting is not an argument. I'm giving you reasons as to why you shouldn't believe in this stuff.
I mean, should I focus my attention on it is a different story.
You should not believe in things that are self-contradictory, for which there's absolutely zero proof and evidence, and which defy reality and reason.
Shit yourself.
Well done for standing up to him. It's well done for standing up to Molly. Most people don't dare, because Molly can get quite aggressive when people people sort of like get scathing with him. He'll get very scathing with other people, but he generally doesn't like it when people get with him. He tolerates it from some people, like Peter Joseph of the Zeitgeist Project. I mean, when Joseph and he had his debate, Stefan was actually quite was more respectful to him than he would be to his regular callers, because I suppose he regards Peter Joseph as a fellow. I don't know. I don't want to be unfair to Stefan here, but kind of a fellow, an equal kind of like contributor. And this is why he says, I would really appreciate it if you would stop calling my arguments this and insulting my position. I don't believe I've constantly insulted yours. Normally, when people just start talking to him like Joseph did, he would end the call. But funny enough, Molly, I mean, I say well done to this caller for standing up to Molly, but Molly actually responds far more calmly than he normally does. But again, Molly is not giving him reasons not to believe. I mean, Molly has said several times, this is made up. There's so much more in this world that's real. Why are you believing in nonsense? He said, well, it is the brain plays tricks, people lie. He's given a whole list of reasons why he shouldn't actually address what the caller is saying. He's delivered a whole series of skeptobabble of skeptic cliches. That's all he's done so far. So this guy. Now I don't think it's actually. To be honest, I don't think Stefan is gaslighting this guy. He's not gaslighting the caller. He is simply. In fact, he's been quite consistent, Stefan. He's been consistently wrong. I think he is talking at cross purposes. They're not communicating properly, because this man obviously understands a lot more about this particular subject and is trying to address Stefan in the way he would someone who has similar knowledge, like me. But he's addressing someone who hasn't really researched this in great detail. This is not like necessarily a bad thing for Stefan. He has a lot to look into. We all have a lot to look into. We can all be stumped by a move that, we can all be like floored by a move that we're not familiar with. The best boxer in the world can be knocked flat by by a punch he doesn't expect. He doesn't expect it to come from, because he's not used to his opponent's technique.
Our entire universe and physical matter is generated by a mind. So,
I'm sorry?
Our entire universe and physical reality is still generated by a mind. So, matter doesn't exist outside of mind either.
So I don't exist for you.
I mean, we all exist inside this mind known as God. So if you don't believe in God, then you don't exist. No, it's like there is no God, then you don't exist.
So God is responsible for my existence, and if I don't believe in God, I don't exist.
Okay, so we're in a situation now where Stefan again is addressing this point on a level differently to the caller. He's answering the caller on a level of understanding that the caller doesn't share. So I'm sure the caller could come back and talk about the mind matter link, about the conscience generates A, B, and C. We've all heard about these things before. We've all seen things like The Secret and What the Bleep Do We Know and stuff like that. But Stefan is not aware of these points. So he's answering this caller from a position which, I understand why the caller's frustrated here, but I would say to the caller, you need to be patient with Stefan on this. And I think I probably would be patient with him, probably more so. And I have to deal with people like this all the time. But this is why I don't necessarily talk to everyone about it. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at the moment. It's kind of like again, they're at cross purposes at the moment.
No, it's like atheists. So there would have to be a God for you to exist in like a singular reality. So.
Okay, fantastic. That's a very interesting thesis. Make the case. I'd love to hear it. I mean that sincerely. Like, I'd love to hear the case. You're just saying stuff, but I'd love to hear the case. Like, make the case.
All right, so we all exist inside the same reality. So that singular thing, which would have several different factors, it would be all-knowing. Consider it would contain all our information. It would be universal.
No. I don't know. You're begging the question. So you want to make the case that we only exist in the mind of God. Is that right?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, then make the case.
All right. So, overall case is that before we all exist inside of the mind of God. So God would be everywhere. All right. He's all-knowing and he's our own creator. So let's say God time travels in order to create our own universe. That's how space-time even begins. Everything that exists, therefore, is willed by God. And it exists virtually inside of his own like matrix. Now, everything outside of that matrix, outside of his own information, essentially doesn't exist. So therefore,
No, but you're not.
all
Sorry,
inside
you're
of-
not. Sorry to interrupt. You're not making a case. You're just making statements. Like, God is everywhere. Everything is willed by God. These are not proofs. This is not how you reason with people. This is not how you make a case. You're just saying stuff.
Shit yourself.
Okay, now this is a point in the conversation where the caller himself also sounds quite confused, and I think what he's trying to talk about now is something where the reason he doesn't put himself across so well now is because he doesn't have all the information he needs to hand. I've been in this situation many times in my debate with Bowler Hat Man. Sometimes I was kind of like a bit on the ropes because I wanted to bring up an issue which I hadn't researched beforehand because I didn't know it was going to come up in the conversation. And it could be that the caller was like that. To be fair, the caller didn't. I don't think that when the caller joined the call with Molly, based on what he says in the first 5 minutes before they come onto this subject, I don't think he expected this to come up either, which is why he doesn't have all the information he needs to hand. He's currently ransacking his memory to get the information he needs, and as a result, he is like a bit aphasic in his discussion with Molly, and then Molly, of course, is already kind of like out of his depth. So that part of the discussion wasn't very good. Through no fault of the individuals, it's just, again, it's cross tracks.
You have to prove it, right? You have to have some evidence for what you believe. Otherwise, you can't connect with other human beings because we can only connect in reality, reason, evidence, the evidence of the senses, and so on.
Shit yourself.
There's a long pause at that point, and I put the bumper in halfway through this very long pause. But you see, the caller clearly does want to do that. He's trying to connect with it on an evidential basis, and that's what he's doing. And so, obviously, this is very, very difficult for him, and indeed, it's difficult for Stefan as well. But they are both making an effort, I must say. They're both trying to deal with each other on that level.
I mean, it's a foundational belief of yours, and you should have a reason for it, right?
I mean, do we exist inside multiple realities or just one like coherent thing?
I mean, my case would be that we exist within one reality independent of an external mind.
Would all that information be connected into a mind or no?
No. No, because there's no evidence for it,
would
and
it all
there's
be
no need
scattered
for
into
the...
like different realities in a
Sorry,
way?
go ahead.
So would it all be scattered into like different realities in a way?
I have no idea what you mean by different realities.
So like what would keep it whole or unified? Like that reality?
You mean our tangible empirical reality?
Just like everything like you could possibly comprehend.
What holds it all together? My skull and gravity and so on, right? I mean, what holds my brain together is laws of physics and biology and my skull and all of that. So I don't see any need for an external omnipotent consciousness.
Okay, again, this is more talking at cross purposes. They're not communicating. I must say, Stefan is showing some curiosity, though. He's being a lot. Sorry, I just got itchy here. Again, I tend to itch a lot when I'm broadcasting, especially my nose. Stefan is being more patient than he is with most people. He is showing some. I'm kind of impressed that he's showing some curiosity here, and so credit to him for that. But again, it's still a little bit. It's frustrating that they're not really joining themselves on a kind of like they're not joining themselves on a kind of in terms of common sense and things like that.
I mean, so you would kind of view yourself as a god in a way. That your mind, your own brain.
No.
All right.
No, he's not Richard.
Not a god. Just a man.
All right. So God models. So our brains model reality in a way. Like that's
What
how
do
we
you
make
mean?
sense of the world. What do I mean? By our brains model reality?
Yeah.
I mean, you know where things are, and your brain stores that in memory, right? So for you to like interact with the world, there has to be like a level of coherence in your own mind.
Oh, like I have a show here Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, so I show up Wednesday night at 7 o'clock and do the show. You
No,
mean
no,
something
like
that?
spatial reasoning, like where things are in your room, like how things work.
Yes. So, I mean, you're totally right about that. So we get evidence of the senses in raw data, and then our brain, our consciousness, assembles that into a coherent and accurate view of the universe. And we couldn't survive as creatures if we didn't do that. Like we couldn't hunt, we couldn't fight, we couldn't build shelter or anything like that if we didn't have an accurate view of the universe. So from the raw evidence of the senses, we create a rational and coherent and objective view of the universe so that we can operate within it in order to survive.
Shit yourself.
Now that's correct. What Stefan said is correct about cognition. Definitely, it's very, very fundamental. But that idea neither supports nor discredits the caller's argument about mysticism being real. It's kind of like neutral.
So I would simply go out on a foot and say that sort of model is generated, but on a larger scale inside what we could pretty much call the mind of God.
Okay, so make that case.
And that's what we
Hang
exist
on,
inside.
you can't just say it though. You got to make a case.
Shit yourself.
Yeah, the caller does keep trying to make a case here, but Stefan doesn't respond the way I think it's the best way to respond on this. And again, I don't think that's because Stefan is not willfully ignorant at this point. He's not like he's not being dishonest. He's simply unable to understand the caller's points, and that's the problem there.
All right. So is your mind conscious?
Yes.
All right. So if your mind is conscious, could it be that it would exist inside of an even greater consciousness? That such a being and a thing, let's say as complicated as the entire universe, that would contain all of our own minds, be generating like your mind and everyone else's?
No.
All right. So there's nothing more complicated than the human mind. That
I
wouldn't.
didn't say
also,
that. I mean, I assume that there are things more complicated than the human mind because the universe is.
All right, so the
Hang on.
universe
So
generating your mind is
you
more
gotta let me.
complicated.
You. I want you to keep your word and let me finish my thoughts.
Shit yourself.
Right. This is the old idea. This is an old adage that I've often heard before about the mind and about the. Stefan is coming from the position that his mind is generated by his brain. Now, several scientists have actually said that the human brain actually is the most complicated thing we know of in the entire universe. Stefan has said he's sure there are more complicated things out there. Well, if they are, we don't know about them. And the problem with our brain is that the materialism then comes up against a little bit of a contradiction in a sense, and it's often described by the adage, which you may have heard, which is if our minds were generated by our brain, then we couldn't understand our brains because we'd be too stupid, which is kind of saying inevitably there has to be some kind of mystery of our brain because we can't reflect our own cognitive abilities, our own intelligence back onto it and then kind of analyze it from something above it. So that's I don't know if Stefan has ever heard that before, but it's a very interesting idea.
So, of course, there are things out there, I'm sure, that are more complicated than the human mind. There is life out there more complicated that's had more time to evolve and so on. So, yeah, there are things more complicated. But the thing is, if you're going to say consciousness exists within a larger consciousness, then God would exist in a larger consciousness, and God would exist in a larger consciousness, and the super God and the super God squared and the super God cubed. Like, let me finish. Gotta let me finish. My thoughts. Okay? This is how you have a conversation, right? So it's the problem of infinite regression. So if we say all consciousness exists within an infinitely larger consciousness, then that just goes on and on forever. At some point, there has to be a consciousness that is not embedded in a larger consciousness. And that's just us, because we don't need any of that. At some point, you have to stop the infinite regression, and you have to say, this is the limit of consciousness within consciousness. And since there's zero evidence for our consciousness being embedded in a larger consciousness, and since you have to accept that there's a consciousness that's not embedded in a larger consciousness, which in this case would be God, you have an unnecessary multiplication of explanations for which there's zero evidence, and you should abandon it as false and incorrect.
Shit yourself.
All right, now, it's not incorrect. There is evidence. Like I said, going back to the beginning subjects that he talked about, that is supernatural paranormal phenomena. But, you know, he's brought up a valid conundrum, which I've often wondered. Indeed, even this comes up in priests and things like that, in theology. Yes, you know, even when I was a Roman Catholic and I went to church, I used to go to mass, and the priest, Father Pascal, he used to bring this up. He said, well, if God created us, who created God? And then you end up in a kind of like, well, it's God's all the way down, or there's some super levitating super God and things like that. It is a contradiction, and it's a conundrum. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, Ken Wilber, who's a very interesting chap, actually, Ken Wilber, he's tried to deal with this in his book. He wrote a book called I think it was actually called A Brief History of Everything, which is a rather hubristic title, but it was a very interesting book. And it's a condensation of a longer book that he wrote, where he talks about what he calls the holarchy. He says everything is a holon, meaning it's a part of something, but it's a part of something, but it in itself also contains parts. I didn't think it was a very, very good explanation, and we'll see what the caller has to say.
I'd say that's definitely a logical fallacy, and that this is why God is known as the self-generated, also known as the all, because he generates himself, including space-time.
Okay, so hang on. So sorry. So you have consciousness that generates itself. So that's me. Like you already say, consciousness can generate itself. So that's me. And my consciousness generates. Hang on. My consciousness generates itself, and you say, well, God does that, but you don't need it. If you're going to say consciousness can generate itself, then my consciousness generates itself, and we don't need all of this other infinity for which there's zero evidence.
Long pause. Go on, go for it. It's a very long pause.
I would say the consciousness of God generates itself, whereas the consciousness of humans, that's generated by God.
Okay, so here's what you need. So here's what you need to do. We can prove this. So you can prove this very easily. You can prove this very easily, which is, if I am contained within the consciousness of God, and you know that for certain, then it would make more sense for you to have God speak to me than for you to be speaking to me, because you and I are both embedded in the consciousness of God. And so if you can just have God speak to me, that would prove, if I say, look, I'm Alexander Graham Bell, and I say, look, I can phone you over these copper wires, and I can talk to you 10 miles away or 100 miles away or whatever, right? Okay, that would seem a little bit unbelievable at the turn of the last century. But what you do, you phone up and you say, oh, hello, right? And then you hear the voice and you can talk back and forth. And so if you believe that there's an infinite, perfect consciousness that surrounds us like the force and permeates us and knows everything, then you just need to, like, why are you talking to me? If you have infinite consciousness that can communicate with me, then rather than telling me about this infinite consciousness, the infinite consciousness would contact me himself, because obviously you believe he's contacted you, which is why you have these beliefs. I believe that it is a bit of a vainglorious delusion, that you're not achieving much in life, so you like to feel special by making up consciousnesses and alternate dimensions and ghosts, and that way you feel like you are special or achieving something or the center of someone's attention, which I don't think you are. But it wouldn't make any sense for you to tell me all about this absolutely perfect consciousness. What would make sense is for that absolutely perfect consciousness to communicate to me, which he never has because he doesn't exist.
Shit yourself.
Okay, well, firstly, Stefan was unfair there, where he said to the caller, "Oh, he's actually literally now accusing him of making stuff up, not just believing things that other people have said, actually making things up." That was unfair. But then, of course, I think the caller was also unfair to Stefan when he accused him of committing a logical fallacy, because Stefan was not committing a logical fallacy. As I've said before, he brought up a valid conundrum. Yeah. Now, the thing about it is, I do wonder what he says afterwards about. He says, "Well, you think that God has talked to you and things like that. Why doesn't he talk to me?" Stefan, she started going to church lately. He made a video called "Why I Was Wrong About Christianity," and he's taken interest in Christianity. He's made friends with Christians, and he goes to church. He takes his family there. Now, this doesn't mean he's become a believer. He's not actually abandoned his atheism, unlike Dave Cullen, Computing Forever, whose his rejection of new atheism and his acceptance of cultural Christianity has been mixed with a genuine faith. Stefan doesn't have a genuine faith, but he does go to church. And if you ask those people at church, because he does talk to them, he talks to the vicar, he talks to the people, they would explain this sort of thing to him about how you do communicate. And I mean, he says things like, "Well, the reason you make this stuff up because you want people to pay you attention. You want to be the subject of someone's attention, the object of somebody's thoughts and feelings, and you're not. And that's unbearable. So you have a fantasy to says, yes, you are. You are actually the object of someone's attention." That's fair enough. But what if evidence? What if I'm bringing something completely new up now, which I've not told anyone before, and I'm not going to go into details now. I'm working on an article about this for Panmo Voice, and I will bring it up on a future video. But what if something happens which confirms something physical in the world that is there, tangible, real, material, that confirms that you are actually not alone in your predicament and someone is showing you attention? What if that happens? Wonder how Stefan would react if that happened, because I know how I've reacted, and I'll say more about that in the future. Sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger there.
All right, so now you're both gaslighting and throwing out ad hominem attacks, so.
He's right there.
And being quite a hypocrite for interrupting.
Yeah, that's a fair point for sure. Sorry about that. Now, it's not an ad hominem because there has to be some reason why you would believe things that aren't at all logical and for which there's no evidence. There's usually some sort of psychological motivation.
I don't see it as illogical. It's like the entire universe is going to be contained from within itself. Understand? So that's all this unified thing. All right? It doesn't exist in a vacuum. All right? Is your brain all connected into one thing?
You know that you're just doing word salad here, right? The universe is connected to within itself. Like, that doesn't mean anything.
I mean, obviously it is. We're not living in this huge multiverse where things like this appear in and out of reality.
I gave it a shot. But this is not somebody who's going to have any capacity for reasoning. But,
oh, dear, that's a shame. I think Stefan's now ended the call. Well, firstly, I was very impressed that Stefan actually apologized when the caller accused him of being a hypocrite. So I'm glad the caller stood up to him. And I was quite surprised that Stefan was so generous with the criticism. He's not often. So, but the thing about it is, I mean, what the man started to talk about was what you might call it goes in several forms. It's Carl Jung's collective unconsciousness. It's the morphogenetic fields that Rupert Sheldrake talks about. It's the sense of being stared at, dogs who know their owners are coming home. The fact that minds are connected at a higher level, which can't be explained in terms of physicality, even if you take into account electromagnetic fields. which of course the brain does generate, but it doesn't generate electromagnetic fields that are that strong. In fact, they're so strong that even if you stuck your head right up against someone else's, you couldn't communicate via that method. So something else is going on. Some people the good thing is there's people like Roger Penrose who bring this up, who is he's a proper scientist, he colleague of Stephen Hawking's. He now talks about the brain being a quantum computer and things like this. There's lots of other people who talk about things like on this level. So Stefan is actually not only behind the times when it comes to the woo world, he's actually behind the times when it comes to current scientific theory. But I'll let him carry on. There was no bumper there. I just thought I'll get that in now so I don't lose track of and remember what he says.
Maybe this is just a sort of habit from myself in the past, where I tried to save my mom from this kind of stuff, but it's not gonna happen, and it is a shame. I mean, I haven't engaged with someone like this in many years.
Shit yourself.
Now, firstly, the word multiverse is a scientific word. It's a scientific term. Again, if Stefan keeps if Stefan keeps track with the current scientific world, he would understand this. And indeed, there's even, like I said, Rupert Sheldrake talks about this sort of stuff. Roger Penrose, and there's Stuart Hameroff, who's a colleague of Penrose, who's a former doctor who comes into this from the sort of medical perspective when he was an anaesthetist. But there's others as well. I mean, there's Michio Kaku, who's one of the world's most famous pop scientists. He uses the term multiverse. He's even written a book called, I think that's the title of this book he wrote, which I've read. It's a scientific term. Now, as far as what he says about his mother is very revealing, because he says I tried to save my mum from this. And I think what he's just said there explains an awful lot. And indeed, this came up in part 2. I remember, because I did watch like a few minutes of reply to Stefan Molyneux, Mysticism, second reply to Stefan Molyneux. This is the third reply. It turns out his mother was some kind of believer in various things. I think she was into tarot cards and spiritualism and stuff like this. And as Stefan has said, she was also an extremely cruel and abusive woman. And I sympathize with that very much. And indeed, that I think it might explain some of my psychology as well. I've gone a different direction from Stefan, but it might explain some of my psychology, because my mother was also psychologically abusive to me, and my father was and is too weak to resist and couldn't defend me, and that has shaped my entire life. And I think the fact that Stefan's mum, who was, I think, worse than, I mean, he hasn't talked about all the things she did to him, but she was emotionally abusive and physically abusive to him when he was too young to fight back. That, of course, has shaped his life. But like one thing that Stefan and I have very much in common is we're trying to turn that into something positive. We're trying to do a kind of form of spiritual alchemy by taking crap and turning it into gold. And I respect Stefan for that. I really do. This is one of the reasons I still watch him.
But I hope that you found that somewhat useful, in that
I did.
It is really important to try to engage with people, because we all have some irrational ideas. We all have some nutty ideas. And
you've got lots of them, Stefan. Believe me. This video project actually proves that.
I've never really had that. There's a certain kind of impermeability or imperviousness to external reality that people just can't seem to get through. It's a real shame. You cannot get through to people who view themselves as a kind of God. Because he said, oh, so you think you're a God? It's like, well, no, you think you're a God because you have access to this perfect universe and God and brain. Then why would you need to talk to me? The universe would talk to me. All right, we have another caller. What is on your mind?
Right, that's the end of that audio. Now, the thing about it is, Stefan says that people are impermeable to reality, when all that's happened is, people are not impermeable to reality. The people you deal with in these kinds of conversations, it's just you and the people you talk to are impermeable to each other's positions and each other's worldviews, and that's what it is. And to break down that barrier, that impermeable barrier, and actually achieve some kind of osmosis between the two is not easy. It's something that I have put a lot of effort into, and I still maybe haven't achieved it completely. But I think I put more effort into it than you have, and indeed the caller has, and indeed most people do. This is why I talk to people like a bowler hat man, a skeptic of the north, and I go to QED conferences, and I go to Oxford Skeptics in the pub and other skeptics in the pub. I'll just show you this article now. I don't know if it's worth reading the whole thing, but this article is quite relevant actually. It's this is why people believe in the soul, out-of-body experiences. This is by Jesus Zamora Bonilla. My goodness me, his name is far from atheistic, although he didn't give himself that, of course. His parents did. But so this is mapping ignorance. That's a good name, isn't it? The idea that human beings are composed of two kinds of substances, a material body and spiritual mind or soul, is probably as old as modern human beings, and is certainly insufflated most of the world's religions. I never heard the word insufflate before. As well as a big number of philosophical theories about human nature. Even non-religious people admit, in a non-small proportion, that we have to be more than just flesh and bones. In modern philosophy, it was Descartes, the author, that gave the most persuading arguments in the defense of the dualist worldview of human beings. From his famous argument, I think, therefore I am, he inferred that the reality of our thinking or our consciousness is more certain and more clearly knowable than that of the physical world. And he also argued that consciousness cannot have a material nature, since we can conceive that we are conscious mind without a body. It would follow from this, according to the French philosopher, that the nature of consciousness or thought or mind is different from the nature of physical objects. For example, we cannot conceive of an object having mass without it being a physical object. So the concept of mass would be intrinsically attached to the concept of physical body, in a way that the concept of mind, quote unquote, is not. After all, he would say, is it not obvious that being conscious is something radically different from moving an arm or digesting our food? Being thinking, remembering, listening, or suffering are a type of activities that do not resemble at all any physical activity. The difference between mind and body seems, hence, as radical as the difference between an ocean and an equation. For example, so radical, we need to think about each means a totally different system of concepts. Or isn't it? The truth, however, that no matter how apparent different mental and physical activities look like, it is also obvious there is an intimate connection between both. If I do not lit the light in the darkness, my mind could not think or wish whatever she likes. But I will not see anything, and seeing is, of course, a kind of mental activity. If I ingest a certain amount of ethanol, a rather simple molecule, by the way, my mental processes will suffer a notable change. Note, if my mind makes me remember that I put something on the stove half an hour ago, my body, as if by magic, manages to start immediately running towards the kitchen, and so on and so forth. We must not assume, hence, that mind and body are totally heterogeneous. What would make their interaction and interdependence an absolute mystery? But we should rather put a different question. If mind and body are so obviously connected, why is it so obvious for us the impression that they are so heterogeneous? That makes their interaction and independence an absolute mystery. And he goes, this is quite long, actually, out-of-body experience hallucinations, but he goes on to say, well, it's actually not that long. Should I read the whole thing? Here we go. To make a long story short, I think there are mainly two families of facts that are responsible of the nearly self-evident qualitative distinction between the mental and the physical. I think he means four. I think this is probably a translation from another language. The first one are those psychological phenomena in which people literally experience a kind of separation between the body and the soul. You don't need to see all this. I can just read it. Here we go. And the three main types of these phenomena are the so-called out-of-body experiences, OBE, the near-death experiences, NDE, and the mystical experiences, ME. These phenomena are not experimented by a majority of people. theme is experienced, though they are not as unusual as you might think, but they could also only serve as a direct argument for the immaterial essence of the soul. If you've experienced some of them by yourself, and my thesis is that this immateriality is, for most people, not only a well-confirmed hypothesis, that might be confirmed by the testimony of others. Also, group witnesses, independent witnesses, group experiences, but something that is almost directly perceived. So besides these three types of psychical phenomena, there must exist some other mechanisms more universal than the former ones that tend to generate the illusion of immateriality, but these will be topics for future entry. And so the out-of-body experience, an individual, usually in an involuntary way, but sometimes in intended fashion, feels that she has been separated from her body, and she can perceive the environment, including her own organism, from a different point in space, usually higher than where her eyes actually stand. I don't know why this person has to be female, but it's probably very politically correct. At times, the subject also feels she can move floating above the body, or move more or less far away places. That's Robert Monroe. Yeah, Robert Monroe. This type of experience is about one of every 10 people has had. Oh, I haven't. I'd like to. And they are obviously the basis of a popular belief in astral travels, since there are experiences that some individual may voluntarily provoke and that can be triggered by external causes. They have been apt for rigorous experimental study, much more than the types of experience I shall discuss. For example, Blackmore, 1983. Of course, Susan Blackmore, yes. These investigations have included that OBEs are a type of hallucination, distorted perception. Although we have the intuitive impression that we need only open our eyes to see what is there in our surroundings, the truth is our brains perform an enormous amount of processes, systematically decomposing and recomposing that information it gets from our senses. Processes that take place in very different parts of the brain structure, and that, in the end, produce the illusion of being surrounded by objects that behave as they should. Amongst the objects whose behavior the brain has to reconstruct before offering them to our consciousness, as if they were just there, is the very same individual that is perceiving her body and her cognitive processes themselves, or of the parts of them that is biologically relevant that we perceive. Your own perception is the result of a colossal number of neurological processes, not less than any other perception that you have. And, as with the case of any other perception, it can also be distorted by a number of causes. It may happen that under certain conditions, your brain constructs an image of yourself that is very different to the one it would generate in normal circumstances. And this distorted image will look as real for us simply because this seeming real is the most important quality our brain attaches to the perceptual images it constructs, no matter if they're normal or abnormal. The most interesting conclusion from the scientific studies of OBEs is the confirmation that they can be artificially generated. For example, we know from ancient times that some drugs are capable of doing that. Oh, blimey, we're down a rabbit hole now, amongst other perpetual distortions. But more recently, it has been proved that similar experiences can be produced by the electrical stimulation of certain brain areas. For example, as Thomas Metzinger relates in his book, The Ego Tunnel, neurologist Olaf Blank identified in 2002 that the temporal parietal articulation, more or less over or behind your ear, as a region whose stimulation or its deterioration after an accident can generate OBEs. What does not imply that this is the only physical source of this kind of experiences. Other fascinating experiments do not employ a direct manipulation of the brain, but are based on the artificial creation of illusory perceptions. One nice example would be something like the opposite of an OBE. Instead of feeling we are out of our body, what happens here is that something that is not our body is experienced by us as if it were. The case of the rubber hand illusion. Well, that's when someone strokes your hand out of your sight, but you see a hand, another hand like just made of rubber. It feels like that's your hand. For example, a subject extends both hands under the table, but one of them is hidden to her own view by a panel, and next to it there was a rubber hand in a similar position and posture. The experimenter touches simultaneously during some time the real hand and the artificial fake one. And after some minutes, the subject perceives the latter as if it were her real hand. And she even starts perceiving something like a ghost arm connecting her shoulder to the fake hand. Metzinger extended this experiment in order to produce what he called a virtual OBE. Well, the subject is walking. She wears virtual reality glasses in which it is projected the image recorded by a camera that is moving 1 meter behind her. So she is seeing from her back her own body walking 1 meter in front of her. After some minutes, she starts perceiving that image of the body as if it were her real body, and saw it as if she saw from a spiritual astral body that were walking 1 meter behind the physical one. And the references here are Susan Blackmore, Beyond the Body, Academy, Chicago, 1983, and Metzinger, The Ego Tunnel, which I think Anthony Peake has referred to Metzinger. So that's that article there. I mean, of course, what's in that article is not true, and I could do a reply video. I could do a reply to that now, but then this video will then be another 2 hours. And I've done other videos responding to those points, but that's just giving you an example of the other side of the story. So once again, despite everything, I want to say a big thank you to Stefan Molyneux for keeping me interested in various things that he talks about. And the more I disagree with him, the more fascinating I find him. I really, really do. And no doubt, well, there will be more. In fact, there's no doubt at all, because I've explained before, I'm currently working on another reply video to Stefan Molyneux on a different subject. And when that's going to be uploaded, I'm not sure, because but there's a lot more coming up. I'm going to Awaken Aware next weekend, so if you're going to that, I will see you there. And of course, there will be a Panwo TV reportage as usual. And I've got to do a reply to comments video again at some point. I don't think I'll have time this week, but I'll do one as soon as I can, because they're building up again. But in the meantime, thank you all of you for watching Panwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.